We were taking a look at different ways of instituting some kind of logical access control with routers, firewalls, VPNs, with antivirus, with role-based security. Whatever method you use, if you use something software or hardware-based, the whole point is it's going to ensure that CIA triangle: confidentiality, integrity, availability. Now, some of them are for confidentiality, some are for integrity, but mostly it's to protect our data. Only authorized people. It hasn't changed, and the people who do need it can get to it. It prevents the unauthorized access to sensitive data and prevents unauthorized users from modifying or copying data. There's all kinds of software you can get, and operating systems and network devices can use it. All kinds of software you can have that you can apply that can enforce the CIA triangle, from encryption software to intrusion detection to access control software to whatever. Whatever it does, though, whatever it is that you employ should somehow support CIA, or at least some part of CIA. Usually this access control software is indeed done at the operating system level and or at the network level. So we know with identification and authentication, I prove my identity and I prove it to a system. Username and password, some kind of biometric, some kind of two-factor authentication, the card or the token. And so the easiest one, of course, is usernames and passwords. However, that's also the easiest to hack. There are loads of tools that will just take a huge list of words and try them against some website or try them against some server until it goes through the whole list to see if that's the password. And if that fails, then it'll try combinations until it figures it out. So the one-factor username and password, one-factor authentication, not very strong. We can, of course, also have the idea of the tokens or the biometrics, or we can have the multi-factor where you have to maybe have two things. You have something and you know the PIN. And there's also this concept called single sign-on. Now, single sign-on is a way of making things easier for users, but you as an auditor need to be aware of this, because whenever you make something more convenient for people, you're usually taking away from security, or else you're putting in a whole lot more effort to maintain the security. Single sign-on basically says, I log on once, and no matter where I go in the network, I have logged on. Now, in the background, what's really happening is my computer is constantly showing my credential, but I, as the user, don't have to be bothered by it. That's the idea of single sign-on. And the reason why we have single sign-on is because you can have whole different kinds of systems that have no one central authentication mechanism, but instead they have ways to kind of tie them together. So I log on to a Microsoft domain, and through federated services, I only had to have logged on once here, and I can still get over there, and I can get into a whole other system that's not even Microsoft, because we have this extensibility, this single sign-on. Realize that when you're trying to tie these systems together, again, in the name of convenience, there are all kinds of opportunities for it to either break, not work, or have security vulnerabilities. So when we're looking as IS auditors at the authentication sort of system, we need to know what are all the systems people have to log on to and how do they do it. Because it might be that that's safe, but it could be, the problem could be that they're just writing the password down, or they keep forgetting this, or they keep losing something, or they've shared their PIN or their password with people. So we need to know all the possibilities. Once I know what I'm looking at and all the systems people have to log on to, I can start thinking, okay, where could this break down? Where could people circumvent it? So with the authorization process, I've proven my identity, and now I try to go and get into something. I try to access a database, I try to open email, I try to get to my mailbox, I try to open a file or a folder, I try to print something, I try to get to a server or a service. And with authorization, we're determining who has the right, once they've proven themselves, who has the right to get into something. And we can use access rules, and we can also use a concept called least privileged. Now, an access rule is simply, there's a list of rules here, and that rule checks to see if my token, my authentication, has access based on what I'm trying to do. Usually, we want to have a concept called least privilege. Don't make everyone a domain admin. Don't give everyone root privilege. Instead, you give them only enough privilege in the access control list that they need to do their job. No more. That's generally the philosophy behind security, is the principle of least privilege. Now, there are different methods of access control. There's mandatory, discretionary, role-based, and rule-based. Mandatory, which exists on certain Unix systems used by the military, basically there is one central location, one central admin who controls policy. And you have to have a certain clearance level. You, the subject, have a certain clearance level to get to that object over there. And nobody can change it. No one has the right, no one has the ability to change it. And depending on your clearance level determines what you can do. That's mandatory. There's no discretion involved at all. Discretionary, which is what Microsoft and Linux and most operating systems are, is an admin can, at their discretion, change the level of access. So as an admin, I can go to a file or a folder, I can go to the security tab, and I can say that this group can read, that group can write, and I can change it as I please as an administrator. In the corporate environment, that's usually what we see as discretionary-based access control. Role-based is usually, depending based on what I do, and the way it's usually implemented is I belong to a group, and the group then is granted permissions, and the administrator has to put me in that group. And so when I log on, here are the groups I belong to, their IDs and me. Should any of them match what I'm trying to do, then okay, I get in. Rule-based is usually used by things like routers and firewalls, network devices. They don't know user from anything. All they know is traffic is coming, and there's a list of rules. If that packet uses a certain protocol, then it can pass. If it does not use the protocol, it's dropped, it's not forwarded. If it has certain keywords or attachments or executables or things in the traffic, they're either allowed or not allowed. Don't care where they came from, don't care who they came from. Now, you can, of course, set rules saying if it comes from these IP addresses or these particular networks, yes or no. But in rule-based, these are usually network devices that, frankly, don't care the person who originated. They might care the IP address or the protocol, but they're usually looking to see if the traffic matches certain network rules: protocol, IP address, port number. So that's rule-based. So your access control can include any of these. In a corporate environment, you're probably not likely to see mandatory access control, but you will see it in the military. You are very likely to see discretionary and role-based and rule-based when you're looking at routers and firewalls. So with logical access control administration, we can have it where it is controlled by one machine, like say with Active Directory, we've got an Active Directory domain controller, and it basically sends policy out from a central location. We can also have it be decentralized. So like, for example, I can go to each workstation and set some additional role-based security and some additional discretionary security. We have to be aware of all of the ways that security has been implemented, because maybe they've got an Active Directory domain. Maybe they've got group policy in Active Directory, and the policy is centrally stored and centrally set up, and all machines know about it. But then somebody logs on locally as the local admin and totally circumvents all that. So you have to be aware of all the possibilities when you're an IS auditor. How are people perhaps getting around the access control that's been set? One of the biggest things that people have to worry about is security for people coming in from the outside. I'm working from home, I'm working from a hotel, I'm working from some job site, from some conference center, some coffee shop. So I'm connecting remotely. And this is a big one when we're doing IS auditing. People who are working from a remote location, they're telecommuting. What are the risks of remote access? Well, if I'm working from home, maybe my kids are playing games on my laptop and they've infected my laptop. And now when I make a connection, my laptop is infecting the network. Maybe I have unauthorized access. I'm using the wrong kind of software. I'm using unauthorized software or unauthorized protocols. Or maybe my software is not configured properly. Or there are physical security issues. You know, in my laptop, I leave it for just a moment, someone else gets on it, or it just gets stolen or something like that. Or it's possible even that since we're allowing remote access, maybe we have compromised machines that are doing like a denial of service once they connect. So, I mean, there are all kinds of risks to remote access. Again, you have to configure your VPN server and your firewall to control that. And most operating systems allow you to configure something called network access protection, which is basically a whole infrastructure of servers that require clients that connect to prove their health, prove that they have antivirus and patches and firewalls set a certain way before they're allowed to even make a connection, or before they're allowed to connect to the wireless, or before they're allowed to, when they plug into a switch, before they're allowed to get past the switch onto the main network. There are whole disciplines and whole topics on remote access control, and there are actually whole classes that include remote access control as part of the subject. As IS auditors, we have to ask about that. What controls are in place for all the remote access? We talked before about monitoring system access. Okay, who has the right to actually sit at this machine? Because you can set up auditing on most machines to see who's been sitting here, and you can look at the log and see who's been accessing it or even sitting there and getting a desktop. So we'll want to look at that as well, especially for the servers and the routers and the infrastructure devices. So when we're trying to design, implement, and monitor access controls, when we're evaluating all that, first thing is you need to understand all the risks that are involved. And you got to look at the documentation, look at the job functions, and do whole risk assessments. You need to gain familiarity with the environment, and that's going to take you a little bit of time. You need to review all of their documentation, their policies, observe the way they're doing things, their procedures. We need to see if authentication is working right, if antivirus is working right, if access control is working right. Are they using proper encryption? Are the firewalls configured right? If they're using any kind of access control software, which they probably are with NTFS and share permissions and print permissions, is that operating properly? You know, what kinds of rights management are they using, and do they configure that right? And we also need to verify that if they're allowing remote access, that they've done that securely, and we need to evaluate that. And all of this takes some time. It takes reviewing everything, and it will also include a lot of penetration testing. So with that, that is the end of this topic. Let's now talk about physical access control.